Dear students, today we are going to start a series of lecture on cardiovascular pharmacology. Okay, so in cardiovascular pharmacology we have a lot of topics like anti-anginal drugs, antihypertensive drugs, diuretics, drugs used in heart failure, etc. Regarding the cardiovascular drugs, I would say that these drugs are very important for your clinical practice. Okay, as we have seen in autonomic drugs, those drugs are not used in clinical practice that much. Although the drugs used in autonomic for nervous system are very important for learning and understanding the basics of pharmacology, but not for clinical practice that much. But the cardiovascular drugs are very important for your clinical practice, for your career. Okay, so without further ado, let's start our today's topic, that is anti-anginal drugs. Okay, so let's look at the definition of angina. What is angina? Angina is a clinical syndrome. It's a clinical syndrome which results from transient. Okay, this is transient, that means short-lived, reversible. This is reversible. Okay, which is not permanent, right? This is reversible ischemia, that means loss of blood supply to a tissue. Okay, so ischemia clinically presents as central chest pain. Okay, that the chest pain will be central. Okay, or chest discomfort. What I mean, there will be chest pain or chest discomfort. Okay, so if there is chest discomfort, what it will look like? It will like a weight or pressure on the chest, or like a constricting band on the chest, or sometimes this may occur as a burning sensation. Okay, so this chest discomfort or pain may radiate. Okay, so this can occur only at the site of chest, that means centrally on the chest, or it can radiate, it can move where on to one arm, that can radiate to one arm or both arms, or to the neck, or to the jaw, or to the epigastrium, or may not radiate at all. It can be localized on the central chest area, or sometimes may be felt only in the area of radiation. There is no central chest pain, there is no chest pain, only there is pain on the, maybe on the arm or on the neck. Okay, so this is angina. We have learned the definition along with its clinical presentation, right? Now, what are the causes of angina, or what is the cause of angina? Mainly, there is an imbalance between the demand and supply of oxygen to the myocardium. Okay, so there is an imbalance. Normally there should be a balance between demand and supply, both should be equal, right? So if there is an imbalance between these two things, cardiac oxygen supply is decreased or the demand is increased. In both cases, that can lead to angina. Okay, so it may be due to less oxygen supply or maybe excessive demand of oxygen. Okay, that can lead to angina. Now the duration is usually 15 seconds to 15 minutes for angina. If this never exceeds 20 minutes, if it's more than 20 minutes, it will turn to infarction. We will not call it angina anymore, right? Now come to the types of angina. What are the types of angina? There are mainly three types of angina. One is classic angina or stable angina. Okay, what is that? most common type of angina. This is the most common type, and there is fixed obstruction leading to reduced perfusion. Okay, there is that is induced by exertion like physical activity, emotional stress, and other causes increasing cardiac workload, and that is relieved by rest or nitroglycerin. So what does it mean? Suppose this is a coronary artery, okay, and there is a fixed obstruction, right? Here is a fixed obstruction, and blood is passing through this like, okay. So normally when the patient is at rest, there is no problem with his cardiac oxygenation. Cardiac muscle is getting enough blood from this partially obstructed blood vessel. But when the patient is in stress, okay, like due to physical exercise or emotionally the patient is stressed, then what happens? The cardiac demand of oxygen is increased. So this flow of blood cannot maintain that demand. For that reason, there is pain, there is development of angina. Okay, now let's come to unstable angina. What is an unstable angina? Here pain is more in intensity and duration, and it can occur at rest. Okay, it is not associated with exertion or anything, it occurs at rest. And the obstruction is not fixed, the obstruction is dynamic. That means the atheromatous plaque is continuously changing in mass and shape and may undergo acute changes like ulceration, fissuring, or intraplaque hemorrhage, etc. And this is not relieved by rest or nitroglycerin. So what occurs here? Suppose this is your coronary artery and this is your obstruction, and the obstruction is very big and the obstruction is changing. Okay, sometimes it obstructs up to 80% or 90%. Okay, and there is intraplaque hemorrhage or there is ulceration. All right, so these things are leading to a very grave blockage, right? So the oxygen supply is so much reduced that it cannot maintain the oxygen demand even at rest. So the oxygen demand cannot be maintained even at rest. The obstruction is so big, or the obstruction is changing, or the atheromatous plaque is obstructing the coronary artery more than 70%, right? So that is leading to unstable angina. Now come to Prinzmetal angina or variant angina. What is this? Prinzmetal angina is a very special type of angina where there is no atheromatous plaque, there is no obstruction here. Okay, this is not like this, this is not like an obstruction like this. What happens here? This is usually associated with coronary artery vasospasm. Suppose this is your coronary artery and it occurs like this, okay. So there is occasional vasospasm which leads to angina, and this can occur at rest, right? So due to coronary artery spasm, this can occur at rest. It responds well to coronary vasodilators, right? The vasodilators means the drugs which will dilate this this portion. Okay, the vasodilators will dilate this portion and the angina will be relieved. And this may be associated with atheromatous plaque. Maybe sometimes it can be associated with atheromatous plaque. Suppose this is your coronary artery which has undergone some sort of vasospasm. Okay, on top of that it is associated with the atheromatous plaque here. Okay, so the obstruction is much more severe. Now come to acute coronary syndrome. What is acute coronary syndrome? You will learn this thing in details when you will study cardiology in medicine. So just to mention here, just to make you familiar with the terms, like, right? So it's an emergency condition. This is a medical emergency which results from rupture of an atheromatous plaque and partial or complete obstruction of a coronary artery. Okay, so the plaque is ruptured, right? The rupture of atheromatous plaque, and it comprises unstable angina, non-STE MI, that means non-ST elevated MI and ST elevated MI. What are these things? We will learn these things later. Okay. Now, treatment strategies for angina. What are the treatment strategies? So we have different treatment strategies for different types of angina. For stable angina, you see that here the cardiac workload is more. So drugs are given to reduce the cardiac workload, which I have mentioned already, that this is your coronary artery and here is a fixed obstruction. This is the obstruction here, and the patient undergoes exercise or very cold environment, or there is emotional stress and the oxygen demand is more. So what you would like to do, you would like to reduce the cardiac workload. Okay, by reducing the cardiac workload, you are actually reducing the cardiac oxygen demand, right? So what are the drugs should be used? The drugs used are beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, organic nitrates, etc. Then come to unstable angina. For unstable angina, we have to have more dynamic approach, okay, because this is an emergency condition. So we have to give oxygen, antiplatelet drugs. Then we have to reduce, of course, we have to reduce the cardiac workload and coronary vasodilators if it is associated with spasm, right? Then for Prinzmetal angina, we have already mentioned the preferred group of drug is coronary vasodilator. Okay, so among the coronary vasodilators, the calcium channel blockers, right, nifedipine, these are preferred, or you can use nitroglycerin as well. Let's come to the types of anti-anginal drugs. In your exam, okay, in your written exam, there may be a question like classify the anti-anginal drugs, or in your viva you may be asked what are the types of anti-anginal drugs. So you can classify the anti-anginal drugs like this: nitrates, beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, potassium channel blockers, no, potassium channel openers, okay, and others. So you can see this is a very simple classification. You don't have to memorize like a frantic. Sometimes I know that you tend to memorize the classification, very minute details of classifications you like to memorize, but I like to teach the classifications in a very simple way, because when you will appear for your prof exam, then you will have a lot of classifications to remember at once. So these things will become overwhelming to you. So try to remember the classifications as simple as possible. Okay, right. So let's see what are the types of. So first, nitrates, of course. Glyceryl trinitrate is short acting, and there are some long acting nitrates also, like isosorbide dinitrate and isosorbide mononitrate. Okay, the beta blockers like propranolol, atenolol, these are the beta blockers. Calcium channel blockers, very important. Calcium channel blockers like dihydropyridines, nifedipine. There are some non-dihydropyridines drugs like verapamil and deltiazem. Then potassium channel opener like nicorandil, and some other drugs, or you can say the newer drugs like trimetazidine, ranulazine, ivabradine, etc. Don't try to overcomplicate the things. Okay, so let's talk about nitroglycerin. This is a very important drug in case of angina. So here is your mechanism of smooth muscle contraction. Okay, so first you can see the trigger calcium comes. What is the trigger calcium? Trigger calcium means when there is any change in voltage in the membrane in the cell membrane. Okay, there is any change of voltage that can lead to trigger calcium to come inside. Okay, that will lead to release of calcium from endoplasmic reticulum within the muscle, which is called sarcoplasmic reticulum, and in the other cells this is called endoplasmic reticulum. So from the endoplasmic reticulum there will be release of calcium which will bind with calmodulin. There will be a calcium calmodulin complex that will stimulate myosin light chain kinase, which will lead to phosphorylation of myosin head. Okay, so that will lead to actin myosin interaction, and that will lead to ultimately smooth muscle contraction. Hope you understand this, because you have a very sound knowledge of physiology, how the smooth muscle contracts and stuffs like that. Now our purpose is to know the mechanism of action of glyceryl trinitrate. So how this GTN acts, right? So let's look at the general mechanism. The general mechanism is there is strong venodilation. So glyceryl trinitrate, that leads to dilation of the blood vessel. Suppose this is your blood vessel. Okay, so that will lead to vasodilation. So that leads to, that has a very preference to the veins. Okay, the venous blood vessels rather than arterial blood vessels. So it has preference for veins. So strong venodilation, that will lead to peripheral pooling of blood. Okay, so decreased venous return, that will lead to decreased preload, that will lead to reduced work on the heart. This is the main mechanism, and it can also lead to some arteriolar dilation, that will decrease the afterload, and there is coronary vasodilation, that will improve the collateral circulation. So here one thing you should know, that is preload and afterload. Now what is preload and what is afterload? If you don't know this, so let's see what is preload and what is afterload. Suppose this is your heart. This is your heart, although it is not a very beautiful heart. What happens? What is preload and what is afterload? So this is your right atrium and this is your left atrium. Okay, so venous blood are coming through the inferior vena cava and superior vena cava to the right atrium. Okay, and then it comes to the right ventricle. So the preload is the amount of blood which is present in the ventricles just before contraction. So the amount of blood on which the ventricles have to contract, right? This is called preload. So if this is your heart, atrium, ventricles. So see, if the amount of blood is less, the amount of blood is less here, then the ventricles will have to work very less to expel these things from the heart. Can you understand? And if the amount of blood in the ventricles are very high, excessive amount of blood present here, then these ventricles will have to work a lot in order to expel blood from the heart. Okay, so this is preload, the amount of blood which is present within the ventricles just before contraction. This is preload. So if the venous return to the right atrium is more, if the venous return are more, then the ventricular filling will be more, the ventricles will be filled with more blood, the heart will have to work much more in order to expel this blood from the heart. So the cardiac workload will be more increased. So if you can reduce the venous return, can we reduce the venous return to heart, there will be less blood to work with and the cardiac workload will be less, right? So that will lead to relief of angina. So this is the mechanism of glycerol trinitrate that leads to strong venodilation. So if there is venodilation, the blood will be deposited, or the blood will stay in the periphery more, it will come to the heart less, right? Because you can see that this is your heart, okay, and this is your inferior vena cava. Okay, so if the vena cava is dilated, if it is dilated, then the blood will be will come to the heart less, because there is venodilation, the blood will be pulled due to the gravitational force, it will be pulled downwards, it will remain in the lower area of the body. So there will be reduced entry of blood to the right ventricle, okay, and also from the pulmonary veins to the left ventricle. So there will be less blood and the oxygen demand will be less. Hope you understand this. And now what is afterload? What is afterload? The afterload is, suppose this is your heart, okay, now this is your aorta, through aorta the blood is going to the periphery, okay. So now the heart has to work to propel the blood to the periphery, and if here is more resistance, okay, if here is the pressure here is more, then the heart will have to work much more to expel this blood through this aorta, isn't it? That means if the arteries are constricted, then your heart will have to work more to propel the blood, to expel the blood through these narrow blood vessels, narrow arteries to the periphery. And if your arteries are dilated, suppose your arteries, these are dilated, so this heart will have to work much less to propel this blood through these blood vessels. So this is afterload. So this total peripheral resistance, this is called afterload, and your venous return is called your preload. So glycerol trinitrate acts via both mechanism, but mainly via decreasing the venous return and to some extent by decreasing the peripheral resistance, okay. Now come to the molecular mechanism, some examiners can ask you the molecular mechanism of glycerol trinitrate, you will have to say that glycerol trinitrate enters the cell, that it is converted into nitric oxide by enzyme, and then nitric oxide stimulates cyclic GMP, that leads to stimulation of the guanylyl cyclase enzyme, that leads to phosphorylation of myosin light chain kinase, and myosin light chain kinase is inhibited. When you phosphorylate, then myosin light chain kinase becomes inhibited. No more myosin light chain kinase mediated contraction. Okay, and myosin light chain phosphatase causes dephosphorylation of myosin light chain, and that leads to relaxation. Okay, this is the molecular mechanism. Now come to the pharmacokinetics. The glycerol trinitrate, these nitrates are lipid soluble, given orally. If you give these drugs orally, they will undergo extensive first pass metabolism. So we do not give these drugs orally. Usually we do not give these drugs orally because they undergo extensive first pass metabolism. So glycerol trinitrate is given sublingually. For that reason it is given sublingually. This is rapid acting, works within minutes, and it has a short duration, about 30 minutes. Given orally as sustained release tablet. If you modify the formulation of the drug into a sustained release preparation, then you can give this drug orally. Okay, but if the examiner asks you that through which route you will give glycerol trinitrate, of course you should say that we will give this drug sublingually, because if we give the drug orally, then it will undergo extensive first pass metabolism. And then you can see that isosorbide mononitrate has a long duration of action. Dinitrate is, also has long duration of action. Now the indications, of course, you will use this drug in angina for prompt relief of symptoms. Actually, the nitrates are used for pain relief. In angina, these drugs are used for pain relief. So if the patient has symptom, you can use this drug. Now prophylactically for chronic use, and this drug can be used chronically for prophylaxis. It can be used in acute coronary syndrome, can be used in heart failure, and cyanide poisoning. Why this drug is used in cyanide poisoning? Let's see that nitrates converts hemoglobin to methemoglobin, and methemoglobin binds with cyanide to form cyan methemoglobin. Okay, this methemoglobin binds with cyanide to form cyan methemoglobin. Then sodium thiosulfate is added. If you add sodium thiosulfate, that will convert cyan methemoglobin into sodium thiocyanate, and that is an inert substance that does not produce toxicity. This will be excreted in urine, and of course there will be methemoglobin. Now what are the adverse effects of nitrates? The adverse effects are throbbing headache, flushing of face. Why flushing of face? Because the nitrates lead to dilation of cutaneous blood vessels, so that leads to flushing, and that can lead to postural hypotension. Lightheadedness, dizziness, unconsciousness can occur due to postural hypotension. Now let's see two important terms here. One is nitrate tolerance, another is nitrate dependence. So what is nitrate tolerance and what is nitrate dependence? So nitrate tolerance is if you give nitrate therapy continuously, then there is progressive loss of nitrate effect. Its efficacy is partially lost. Why? Maybe due to exhaustion of the enzyme that converts nitrates to nitric oxide. Okay, so a nitrate free interval should be given, and during that time, during the nitrate free interval, the enzymes will recover and nitrate effects will be back to normal. Okay, the nitrate free interval is given for 10 to 12 hours, usually at night, because the demand of the heart is less. Usually the patient sleeps at night, so the cardiac oxygen demand is less at that time. Okay, So usually the nitrates are given in the morning, and then uh, after lunch, and during night we do not give any nitrate. So there is a nitrate free interval of about 12 to 14 hours, okay, and that is needed for maximum efficacy of nitrates. What is nitrate dependence? If a patient or if a person is exposed to nitrates inadvertently and chronically for a long time, a patient is exposed to nitrates. Suppose a patient is working in a factory which produces nitrates, or which actually deals with nitrates, then labor working in that factory can be exposed to these nitrates chronically. And if there is sudden withdrawal, suppose the person is working 6 days in the factory, and one day he is getting rest, okay, so he is chronically exposed for 6 days, and then he gets rest for one day. That means one day his this day is his nitrate free day. That will lead to, this sudden withdrawal will lead to coronary vasospasm, MI, or death, because angina threshold is lowered. It leads to lowering of the threshold of angina, and in that case another anti-anginal should be chosen and withdrawal should be gradual. Now what I mean by this is that if you are chronically exposed to nitrate, that will lead to vasodilation, chronic vasodilation, and chronic coronary vasodilation. If there is chronic coronary vasodilation and if you stop the drug suddenly, then sudden coronary vasospasm will occur, okay, so the blood vessel will look like this. From this position, this will get into this position. So sudden vasospasm will lead to maybe angina or even MI. That can lead to even MI and death, okay. So we have to be very careful about this. For that reason we have said that if you are using a nitroglycerin to a patient chronically, then withdrawal should be gradual. You cannot withdraw this drug suddenly, okay, and you can choose another anti-anginal drug in case of if there is development of nitrate dependence, okay. Let's see the interactions. Additive action with other vasodilators. So this drug is a vasodilator. Additive action will be seen with other vasodilators. And sildenafil, commonly known as Viagra, that causes marked potentiation of this drug, and that can lead to severe hypotension. Now beta blockers, we have talked about the beta blockers in details in the lecture of anti-adrenergic drugs, so I will not repeat this here, okay. So let's go to the next group of drugs. You can use beta blockers for prophylaxis of angina, and these drugs are not good for prompt symptom relief, okay, used prophylactically. How? They reduce the myocardial oxygen demand, as they reduce the heart rate and contractility, thereby they reduce they reduce the myocardial oxygen demand. Now let's come to the calcium channel blockers. Calcium channel blockers are very important drugs in cardiovascular pharmacology. Now, what are calcium channels? Calcium channels are tiny little channels in the cell membrane, okay. This can be in the vascular cell membrane or can be in the cardiac smooth muscle cell membrane. These are some channels through which calcium enters into the cell. Now, the calcium channels are mainly of two types. One is voltage gated calcium channels and another is receptor mediated calcium channels. The voltage gated calcium channels are subdivided into L type channels and T type channels. L type channels are mainly found in cardiac and vascular smooth muscle, and T type channels are mainly found in neurons. Okay, so the calcium channel blockers we study here, they actually block these L type calcium channels. Okay, so the calcium channel blockers which we study here, they actually block the L type calcium channels, and T type calcium channel blocker is also present. We do not call those drugs calcium channel blockers because we have different name for those drugs. Suppose ethosuximide, which is an anti-epileptic drug. Okay, so we will talk about these drugs, these T type channel blockers in details in anti-epileptic drugs. Now let's concentrate on this thing, that is L type channels, which is subject to calcium channel blockers. Now let's come to the classification of calcium channel blockers. There are two types of calcium channel blockers. One is dihydropyridines, or in short we call them DHP. Okay, DHPs, dihydropyridines, and then the others, these are non-dihydropyridines or non-DHPs. Just simple as that. Okay, so in the dihydropyridine group there are drugs like nifedipine, nimodipine, amlodipine, nicardipine, etc. And in the non-dihydropyridine group there are diltiazem and verapamil. Okay, let's see their pharmacokinetics. These drugs are orally well absorbed, mostly shorter duration of action, high first-pass metabolism, extensive plasma protein binding, and excreted through the kidneys. Now, very important is their indication. Number one is hypertension. You can see here that calcium channel blockers are an excellent group of antihypertensive drugs, very popular antihypertensive drugs. These are preferentially used in older people and in African Americans. In the black American people, these drugs are very effective. Now, dihydropyridines mainly used to lower blood pressure. Okay, we have seen two types of drugs, dihydropyridines and non-dihydropyridines. So as antihypertensives, dihydropyridines are used mainly. Let's see their mechanism of action. They dilate the arterioles. They mainly dilate the arterioles. So arteriolar dilation, there is arteriolar dilation that leads to decreased total peripheral resistance, and that will lead to decreased blood pressure. Okay, so when the arterioles are dilated, then there is mainly decrease in diastolic blood pressure. Now why is that? Let's see. Suppose this is your heart and this is your aorta. Okay, so if the total peripheral resistance is increased, okay, so this is dividing into arteries, arterioles, etc. So if the resistance here is increased, then this is occurring in diastolic phase, right? After the contraction is complete, then during the diastolic phase, if you dilate those blood vessels, if you dilate those uh, arterioles, and that will lead to decreased total peripheral resistance. Okay, so that will lead to decreased blood pressure. Now come to angina pectoris. So in case of classic angina, you can use dihydropyridines and non-dihydropyridines. Why is that? Because if you use dihydropyridines, that will lead to arteriolar dilation, decreased total peripheral resistance, and that will lead to decreased afterload. Okay, and if you use non-dihydropyridines, that will lead to decreased heart rate and contractility. The non-dihydropyridines are actually cardiovascular, cardioselective drugs. The dihydropyridines are vessel selective drugs. These are vessel selective drugs, and the non-DHPs are cardioselective agents. Okay, these are cardioselective agents. So what does it cause? So non-dihydropyridines actually decrease the heart rate and they decrease the force of contraction. So they are actually negative inotropic agents. Mainly they decrease the force of contraction. So they are negative inotropic agents. So thereby they decrease heart rate and contractility, and they decrease the oxygen demand, right? So thereby they act in classic angina. And in case of variant angina, this is very important. In variant angina, dihydropyridines are the drug of choice. Why? They cause coronary vasodilation and that lead to relief of vasospasm. They can be used in arrhythmias. Okay, verapamil, diltiazem are used in paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardias. So mainly these drugs are used in tachyarrhythmias. Okay, tachyarrhythmias where the heart rate is very high. Okay, so in case of tachyarrhythmias, if you give this drug, that will reduce the heart rate, and that will lead to decrease heart rate and normalize the condition. Okay, then come to hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. You can use this drug here. In case of migraine prophylaxis, you can use verapamil, although this is not the first choice in migraine. And then in case of Raynaud's disease, there are peripheral vasoconstriction, vasospasm. So if you use dihydropyridines, that can give some symptomatic relief. And these drugs can be used in premature uterine contractions and preterm labor, as these drugs can relax the the smooth muscles, so that can be used in case of premature uterine contractions. Now let's come to adverse effects. What are their adverse effects? There are some grave adverse effects of this type of drugs. So if you use dihydropyridines, that will lead to vasodilator effects like hypotension. That can lead to hypotension, and if there is hypotension, that can lead to reflex tachycardia, because you are reducing the blood pressure by vasodilator effect, and the heart will try to minimize this effect, right? So it will increase the heart rate. Then there can be flushing, headache, ankle edema, etc. So why ankle edema occurs here? It occurs due to precapillary dilation. So you can see that if this is a capillary, okay, so suppose here is a very big, this is an arteriole, suppose this is an arteriole, and this divides into some capillaries, right? So these are your capillaries. So these capillaries will actually go on to make venules, right? So these are your capillaries. So what happens in capillaries? There is gaseous exchange between tissues and capillaries, right? So there is precapillary dilatation. Actually, the calcium channel blockers, they work on the arterioles more than the venules. So these arterioles are dilated. So when these arterioles are dilated, these venules, so these are called precapillary. These are precapillary, the arterioles, and these venules are postcapillary. So when you are dilating these things, these arterioles are dilated, these venules will be constricted. That is called reflex constriction or reflex postcapillary constriction, and that will lead to increased hydrostatic pressure within this area, right? And that will lead to increased fluid retention, and that will lead to edema formation. That increased hydrostatic pressure will lead to this thing, edema in the ankles. Now let's look at the non-dihydropyridines that can lead to bradycardia. Of course, they reduce the heart rate, so that can lead an adverse effect is bradycardia. Okay, it can lead to constipation and gastroesophageal reflux. Now there are some drug interactions of verapamil. If you give verapamil and digoxin simultaneously, what can happen? Verapamil significantly increases serum digoxin concentration by reducing renal and non-renal digoxin clearance. Okay, so how do they reduce the digoxin clearance? In some books, they say that possibly by reducing its volume of distribution, but the actual mechanism is still not clearly understood. So you don't need to fuss about this mechanism. Just say that if we give verapamil and digoxin together, then that can lead to digoxin toxicity, and it may be by but the mechanism is probably by reducing renal and non-renal digoxin clearance reduction. Okay, and if you give verapamil and statins, so verapamil, this can inhibit the metabolism of statin. So combining these medications may significantly increase the blood level of simvastatin or atorvastatin, whatever statin it is. So verapamil is enzyme inhibitor that will lead to increased plasma level of statins. So that will increase the risk of side effects. What side effects? Statin side effects such as liver damage and a rare but serious condition called rhabdomyolysis. Okay, there is muscle breakdown. Let's see some individual drugs like nifedipine. This is very short acting. This is vasoselective dihydropyridine, very short acting. Okay, and there is amlodipine. Amlodipine is the most popular dihydropyridine which is used for hypertension, and it has a good oral bioavailability. It has a long duration of action, 35 to 45 hours, once daily dosing, less adverse effects. Nimodipine is used in case of cerebral hemorrhage, etc. This drug has a profound use in that cases, like subarachnoid hemorrhage, ruptured aneurysm. You can use this drug. Verapamil and diltiazem, these drugs are cardioselective drugs, and you can use these drugs in case of SVTs, PSVTs, etc., which we have discussed already. And this has less vasodilator action, more cardiodepressant action, and this is contraindicated in heart block and congestive heart failure patients. Now these drugs, these newer drugs, nicorandil, then trimetazidine, ranulazine, ivabradine, you are not supposed to know everything about these drugs. Okay, you have to just remember their names and why they are used. Of course, they are used in angina, and if you want to read about these things a little bit more, if you want to know about these drugs, you can pause this video and you can read it yourself. Okay, so this is nicorandil. Then there is trimetazidine. This drug is This is trimetazidine. Okay, you can see its mechanism of action, its indications, and its adverse effects. Then there is ranolazine. This is ranolazine, its mechanism, use, adverse effects. The examiners are not gonna ask you about these drugs, their mechanisms or anything, or the details in their pharmacokinetics or things like that. Okay, so that's the end of this class. If you have any question, you can ask me in the comment section and I will try to answer you. So that's it for today. Thank you.